Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for December the 6th. Today we are reading together Psalm 142. The 142nd Psalm has been given the title in my Bible, A Cry of Distress. We are told in the superscription that it is a maskil of David, and we're given a bit of a historical marker here. It tells us that this was when he was in the cave. It is a prayer. So we have details here that are important for us to recognize. Number one, this is of David. And then number two, specifically in David's life, this seems to be from the moment whenever he was in a cave. Now, there's a couple of different instances in which we find David in a cave during the text of 1 Samuel. The first time is in 1 Samuel chapter 22, and the second time is in 2 Samuel chapter 24. These two instances of David being in a cave are much different. The initial instance in chapter 22 is whenever he is initially on the run from King Saul after Saul has turned against him. He has hatred and jealousy of David. He pursues David. David runs. He finds himself in a cave. The second instance, though, in chapter 24, his circumstances are much better. The tide is turned more to David's side. He actually has the opportunity to kill Saul, but doesn't do that in the cave there. So whenever we're thinking about this psalm and this being a psalm of lament, this probably tells us then that this psalm is probably more appropriate for the first instance where David is in a cave, where he is on the run and where he is scared and confused, sees himself in a very desperate situation. It probably fits the tenor of this psalm a bit better. So, with that having been said, let me go and get the text up on the screen. We'll read together here in Psalm 142. Again, this is a cry of distress. This is a psalm or a prayer, I guess most specifically a maskil of David, and then it's a prayer. It's whenever he is here in this cave. He's in a difficult situation. Let's see how David is feeling. Because remember, that's really the basis of many of these psalms is an expression of the feelings and the thoughts of the authors at the time of the writing. I think we're going to see that here whenever it comes to this maskil of David, this prayer, whenever he was in a cave. Again, probably putting this in the setting of 2 Samuel 22, if it does fit one of the instances that is revealed to us within Scripture. Having said that, Psalm 142 in verse number 1. I cry aloud to Yahweh. I plead aloud to Yahweh for mercy. I pour out my complaint before him. I reveal my trouble to him. Although my spirit is weak within me, you know my way. Along this path I travel. They have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see. No one stands up for me. There is no refuge for me. No one cares about me. I cry aloud to you, Yahweh. I say, You are my shelter, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I am very weak. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Free me from prison, so that I can praise your name. The righteous will gather around me, because you deal generously with me. Psalm 142. So I referenced 2 Samuel chapter 22. So let me go ahead and turn over there just so we can read just the very beginning of this particular psalm. Excuse me, the very beginning of this particular chapter in David's life. Remember, we're going back here a few chapters to whenever David becomes a great benefit to Saul in the killing of Goliath in chapter 17. Chapter 18, we see the great success, but also comes with the song of Saul's killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. By chapter 9, or within that particular psalm, I believe, within that particular chapter 18, Saul attempts to kill David the first time. He marries Saul's daughter. He's delivered from Saul again in chapter 19. Jonathan protects him in chapter 20. And by the time we get to chapter 22, David is full scale on the run. And he left Gath in 1 Samuel chapter 22 and took refuge in the cave of Adullam. Took refuge in the cave of Adullam. So I'll suggest to you that it seems, again, if this psalm is written about a time that he was in a cave that we have the story about from Scripture, I remember there are many things that happen in the life of David that we don't have text about. So maybe there's another time that he was in a cave that we are that was not given to us. But if it's one of the times that we have, either chapter 22 or chapter 24, chapter 22 seems to make more sense that he's in this cave of Adullam. He's on the run. Somebody that he has great respect for, somebody that he has served, somebody that he has loved in a great sense, is trying to kill him. And I'm sure he's in a his mental state is not exactly in the best condition that it has ever been. So, what does he do during this distress, this deep distress that he is feeling? The text tells us that he appeals to God. There are some verbs here. He says, "I cry aloud, I plead aloud, I pour out my complaint, I reveal my trouble." So David here, in every sense, is emptying out the bucket before God. He is pouring out his soul. He is not holding anything back from God whatsoever. And it's interesting that in these Psalms that we've been engaged in, this series of Psalms from David, we've seen that on a number of occasions where David, the language that is given to us, speaks of David just giving everything to God, being fully transparent to God, lifting up hands to God, showing empty hands, showing him, "I have nothing but what I am telling you." Uh, it makes sense that someone who has such a great confidence in God would turn to him in this way, again, with full transparency, knowing that he has nowhere else to turn but to his God. "Although my spirit is weak," even though David's very disappointed, even though he's very discouraged, even though he's very distressed, he says, "You know my way." Speaking to God, "You know my way. You see it all." And and I think it's important that he says that here in this moment, and acknowledging that God does see everything, and that God is the one who can give mercy, and that he is before God, because he states in at the end of chapter or end of verse 3 and into verse 4, "Although the path I travel, or along the path I travel, they have hidden a trap for me. Look, I look to my right, and I see that no one stands with me. There's no refuge for me. No one cares about me." And I think in this moment here, he is specifically referring to other people, specifically referring to other people, that no one's standing with him while he's on the run initially. And I have to say initially, because at some point back in 1 Samuel 22, at some point the text tells us that David's brothers and his father's whole family heard, and they went down and joined him there. So eventually that does happen, and eventually every man who was desperate or in debt or was discontented rallied to him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. I'm going to assume, based on that text, what is told there and what's being expressed here, that this seems to have been written before all that happens. That initially, as he's on the run, that he does feel totally alone, like every person has abandoned him, not God. We're going to see that here in a second. But he feels as if there's no help from people. There's no support from people. Yes, Jonathan had aided him initially on the run, but as he gets here in this cave, you got to imagine a cave would be a very lonely place. Uh, think about a cave, depending on how deep within the cave you go, be very dark, just dreary. You feel like the moisture and humidity in the air, especially if you're not right there at the opening. You cannot see, like I can look out my window right now and I can see the sky. I can walk to any other room in my house and I can see the sky. But in that cave, it's so solitary, so confined, almost like almost like a prison. He talks about that. He talks about feeling as if he is in a prison in verse number 7. No one is here to help me. It brings to my mind, at least, I think about what Paul says in 2 Timothy, that everyone has abandoned me. No one's been to my aid. I think David in this moment and Paul in that moment maybe had somewhat similar feelings in some ways about men being of no help to him. However, again, he says in verse number 1, "I cry aloud to Yahweh." And he says that again, "I cry out to you, Yahweh. I say, you are my shelter, my portion in the land of the living." Yes, people have abandoned him, but David recognizes that God has not. "You are my shelter." Not this cave. This cave isn't my shelter. You're the one that protects me. You're the one that provides for me. You are my portion. You are what is important. You are what is important to me in the land of the living. So therefore, listen to my cry. Again, I'm very weak. We see that in verse 3 repeated in verse number 7. I'm weak. Um, my enemies are those who are pursuing him. He says they are too strong for me. So what does he ask? Then he asks for Yahweh to rescue him. Rescue me from those who pursue me. Free me from my prison. And what is David's then response going to be? Well, if you do this, free me so I can praise your name. Free me so I can tell others about how you have rescued me, about how you've brought me up from a deserted place to a high and exalted place. And then he recognizes that the righteous will gather around me because you deal generously with me. And again, that does happen. David's brothers, David's father's family, other people do end up coming to his aid, and he does end up again in a better place. So this psalm again seems to me to be on the front end of his ordeal with Saul before David has a lot of people following him before he becomes this great leader. But even in that moment, even in this very distressed moment where he feels disappointment and discouragement, when he feels as if he has no support, when he feels as if he has been abandoned by all people, he knows that God has not abandoned him, that God remains his shelter, that God remains the most important thing to him, that God is his portion. Again, you think about this from the perspective of Paul, you think about this from the perspective of Jesus, whenever all of his disciples abandoned him. We're going to study about that here in a couple of Sundays, about what Jesus went through whenever he was abandoned in his sham of a trial and crucifixion. Uh, in all of these instances, whenever people have abandoned, these faithful individuals have recognized that God did not, and that God remains with them, and that God continues to support them, to be that shelter, and to be their portion. And I hope that that serves as a good reminder for us that if we do feel like we've been abandoned by other people, God will never abandon us, that our faith must remain strong, our trust must remain stayed in Him and in Him alone. If you have any questions or comments about this Psalm 142, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I appreciate you taking some time to read along with me today on this Friday. Looking forward to being with everybody for our Bible classes at 10 and worship assembly at 11 on Sunday. And we'll be back reading again on Monday from Psalm 143, another Psalm of David, another similar type of themed psalm, this one being a cry for help. So looking forward to reading that with you then. Take care and God bless.